Congratulations to Geno Smith, who just capped off a great 2022 season, a year that will go down in Seahawks history as one of the best ever for a quarterback by winning the NFL Comeback Player of the Year award, and certainly well-deserving at that. It's also awesome news to hear that the Seahawks front office and Geno Smith's camp have already undertaken negotiations on a new contract. And with Geno indicating earlier on this offseason that he might be willing to take a little bit of a discount, maybe a little bit of a team-friendly deal, I would expect a common ground deal to get done soon, an extension to be signed, and Geno Smith to remain your Seahawks starting quarterback on into the foreseeable future. Huh? What? He wants what? $40 million a year? How far Geno Smith has come. He started out last offseason with many people not thinking he was worthy of the starting job. Many people in the NFL circles thinking he was like a 40th rated quarterback in the sport. And now we find ourselves talking about how much is too much to be spending on a new contract extension. Let's just start out from here that Geno Smith is certainly well deserving of a contract extension. I would not push back against that. But I think what we've got to think about when these negotiations are undertaking and we're hearing some of these funny numbers being bandied about, that there has to be a line in the sand that we're willing to go. A line in the sand that Schneider himself indicated a couple of weeks ago when he was giving an interview to 710, Wyman, and Bob regarding there being a line in the negotiations. And this is a very key point at this point because of the fact that reportedly the Seahawks have offered Geno Smith a 3-year, $30 million a year deal. And he has turned that down. And that somewhat according to Wyman, I would say, he's kind of giving you, I think, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here because Wyman, of course, is going to be having Schneider on his radio station on the Norm here going into the future. And he does do some of the play-by-play there with Rabel. So there is a little bit of some slight connections to the Seahawks organization. And Wyman has indicated he thinks it's going to be up around $40 million from where Geno Smith's camp, and that's what they are asking for. So you have Seattle at 30, Geno's camp at 40. We've got a little bit of a chasm here. And so there may be a common ground that Seattle is able to find with Geno where you land at somewhere at 32 to 35. Maybe somewhere in there, who knows? I would push back, though, a little bit for the folks saying that we just have to write a blank check for Geno, that there is just not some alternative path that we could go upon, that somehow he is the only magic man to take us forward, and cost is of no problem or issue whatsoever. Cost is very much an issue. When the Seahawks went and won a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson, they were paying 0.56% of the salary cap was going to Russell Wilson. The year after that, when you went to back-to-back Super Bowls, he was only making marginally more than that. By having those savings at the quarterback position, you were able to spend in other areas. You were able to bring in a Cliff Averill and a Michael Bennett when you already had a pretty stocked up team. It prevents you from doing that if you're going to be spending all of that money out on the quarterback position. And I hear many people talking about this Geno deal in terms of, it's actually a mid-market tier deal. If Geno got what his people are reportedly asking for, which is $40 million a year, that would land him somewhere about 8th overall in average per year cost at the quarterback position. That's a high cost. Does Geno tilt the room in that way? I'm not saying, again, that he isn't earning of a contract extension, but that is a mighty amount of money to be giving a man if he is not putting on that cape, flapping in the wind, and out there saving the day on a weekly basis. I'm very pro Geno. I've been a guy that's been backing him up for a very long period of time. I was the guy that originally made this video, as I was hearing from so many from within our own fan base about his limitations and what he couldn't do as we were approaching this NFL season. And then I was the guy that also made this video saying Geno is the way and a contract extension would be appropriate. But I said it would be appropriate around the $25 million mark. not around the $40 million mark. I said in that video, what we are trying to attain here is to find what does not exist in the NFL, which is the mid-market deal, the blue-collar deal. It seems at the quarterback position, you're either being paid pennies, peanuts, or you're making all the money. And there seems to be no in-between ground that lies there that you can find. And indeed, with these negotiations starting with where they're starting, this would be even more proof of that, where there just isn't that mid-tier deal to be found. For those folks that find themselves ardently standing on the side of the fence to say, I'll pretty much almost do a blank check, Geno won me over, I think he is the guy to carry us forward, I would just offer to you to think about those other alternatives here if this cost is going to go this high. What else could you get as an alternative? Could you bring in a Drew Lock type for $5 million, save the rest of the money that you weren't then spending on Geno, and build a stronger overall team? Now, I know there are many people out there that are just as out on Drew Lock as there were just as many people out on Geno Smith within our own fan base this preseason and throughout the last offseason. But I would offer that if a guy like Geno, a former second-round flameout, a guy that everybody's labeled as a bust, can renew and return his career, then other players could do it in addition. It doesn't mean that there's a huge cauldron of guys out there that you can go pluck from, but it does mean that if we're inventive and imaginative, we can find another quarterback out there that's been thrown on the scrap heap, perhaps maybe a little bit prematurely, and build out a better, stronger overall team. Once again, understanding 10 years ago, you went to back-to-back Super Bowls applying a certain type of blueprint. And within that blueprint was not that you had a quarterback who was the superhero who was carrying the team on his back. It was that you had the team carrying, in many ways at times, that quarterback. And that quarterback did enough. Russell was a very good player through his first couple of years, but he wasn't the player he was in 2016, 2017, 2018. They very much had him in kind of a box in how they had him playing, and it wasn't as much asked from him because he had a really good team around him. Why not try to ascend back to that same blueprint? Why not try to angle for that same blueprint? Especially when they've already started the building block process of this that seems to be echoes of that once former blueprint. They haven't started this rebuild process this last offseason with last year's draft saying, we have to get the quarterback right now. Much like they did in 2012, they said, we don't need the young quarterback quite yet. We've got to get the rest of the team in order before we then go get that quarterback, almost as that final step, that last piece to somewhat add. Let me give you a real world comparison to show you what I mean. Let's divvy this up into two options. Option one, the Geno option. You sign him to an extension. He's asking for 40. Seattle's offering 30. They come around to some common ground somewhere around $35 million. That's it. That's all. Option two, you sign Drew Lock to a contract close to what you gave Geno Smith last year, right around $5 million on a one-year prove-it deal. Now I got $30 million to go out there and spend. First up, I'm going to go out there and get Daron Payne, the best defensive tackle free agent out on the open market this offseason. Still a very young guy, helps you in the running game, helps you as a pass rusher. Let's say we sign him to a $15 million on average per year deal. Then you get Tremaine Edmonds. He's looking at getting somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 2-year, $20 million deal. So you sign him to on average a $10 million deal here. Then I go out and I get Ethan Posick. I know some Seahawks fans weren't big on Posick, but he was played out of position for a lot of his time here. When he was finally moved to center at the final year in Seattle, he played pretty well, and he had an outstanding season for the Browns. In fact, his 78 PFF grade would have beat out any of the Seahawks offensive linemen this season in their performative level. And finally, I go back to the defensive line. I go and get Greg Gaines from the Los Angeles Rams, who's been a very useful player for them on that defensive line. Those four players equal out to $30 million, in addition to Drew Lock with his $5 million, where we land at $35 million, or the equivalent of Geno Smith. So I ask you, what's better? Option on the left, option on the right. But hold on, there's more. Because if you look at this deeper, you're not just simply going to let Geno Smith walk for nothing. You're going to put the franchise tag on him and then look to move him in a deal, which means that there's probably a team out there willing to go after him. If Geno Smith's camp is so fervently believing that he is going to have a $40 million offer out there on the open market, and that is why they are demanding that price, then there certainly will be an interesting party or some interested party that would then trade for him. And if you look in past history at quarterbacks, they tend to go for top of the market prices. I don't think you're getting 2 first-round picks for Geno. I don't even think you're getting 1 first-round pick for Geno. But a second and a third, I think that's pretty realistic, or at the very least a second. So let's add that back on into the list. So now You've got Geno Smith on one side, $35 million, multi-year deal, or you got option two, Drew Lock on a 1-year, $5 million deal, Daron Payne, Tremaine Edmonds, Ethan Posick, Greg Gaines, and potentially on top of that, a second and a third round pick. I look at these two options and I think that it's pretty clear as to what is the proper way to go here. Not that I don't want to sign Geno Smith, but there was always going to be a cost that I wasn't willing to cross, and I do hope that John Schneider feels very much the same way. So when I look at a potential of bringing in a much cheaper quarterback where you're able to really reduce down that cost and to be able to put that much more money in other places on this team, build up that much more stronger of a team, and then understand once again that it fits to the blueprint of success you had not 10 years ago. And not 10 years ago with a different staff or a different front office. It was John Schneider running it back then, and it was Pete Carroll, who was your head coach at that time as well. So why not try to replicate the same kind of conditions that you had before? It wasn't necessarily just about building a legendary defense before. It was about building a legendary team. It was the full totality of that team that made them so strong, that allowed them to knock off the greatest offense in NFL history. Let's try to angle for that again if the cost is going to go this high. My name is Brandon Kane. This is the Hawks Nest. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. But beyond all that, don't you ever forget, go Hawks.